Hello once again, and welcome to HRN Revive TV. I'm your host today, Arnold Threatt, and we will continue to look into the sons of Noah. So since the flood, we've had about 4,000 years of history to look at and to examine. Most of that is from the scriptures that we have. And we look at these three family groups or nations, if you will, from the loins of Noah. We should already be identifying ourselves with one of these groups of nations based on their actions and who they represent and what they're doing. And I realize that most of us have already made a choice to follow Yahweh, who would be represented here by Shem. So then as we look at the scriptures that would be encouraging us as we are closing in on the possible last few years before our Messiah returns, I wanted to deal with some scriptures that we may find helpful that would help us identify maybe some problem areas. And it's by no means an extensive in detail look, but it's chosen scriptures that I think will help us to see and to understand a few things. And the one I looked at first by the direction of the Spirit was James chapter 1, or Yaakov, if you will, because I saw him as a straightforward individual who pulled no punches, so to speak. He tells us like it is, in other words. So if you will, join me in the book of Yaakov. We're going to begin in chapter 1 and verse 1. Yaakov, a slave of Yahweh and of the Master Yeshua Messiah, to the 12 tribes in the diaspora among the nations, greetings. My brothers, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the proving of your faith works patience. But let patience have its perfective work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. He's writing to the supposed lost tribes of the nation of Israel, which seem not to be lost to him, and other of the apostles who addressed some of them as well. So they knew where they were. They were just lost to us because perhaps we were trying to find our own identity and identify ourselves with one of the tribes of Israel. But you know, it really doesn't matter because we all come through the same doorway, and that doorway being Yeshua is the only way anybody can get to the Father. He says that in John 14:6, which most of us know by heart. He also has a pattern here in the Word that he gives us of going straight for the jugular vein, if you will, to get to the root of the problem. So he's telling us there in those first three verses that the trials that we go through are for our perfecting, or the perfective work that would reveal Yeshua in each of us. So we are to embrace these trials and let them do that perfective work, because as we allow that to happen, then he moves us on up the ladder of his wisdom and our understanding of him and his ways and his purpose and his plan. So picking up in verse 4 or 5, he says, "But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask from Elohim, who gives to all freely and with grace, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith, doubting nothing. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea being driven by wind and being tossed. For do not let the man suppose that he will receive anything from the Almighty. He is a double-souled man, not dependable in all his ways." So one of the very first things that James addresses here is the acquiring of wisdom, and that the Creator King willingly gives his servants wisdom upon their asking, if they're asking, believing to receive what they're asking for, because they're asking by faith. So a double-souled man here would identify with Japheth, who helped Shem cover his father's nakedness, but has sided with Esau several times throughout history against Israel. So we see here that Japheth, being a double-minded man in a lot of ways, could fluctuate from siding with the righteous and or with the unrighteous, whatever seems to please him. Take a little detour here and go and read Psalms 40, verse 4. It says, "Blessed is the man who sets Yahweh as his trust, and does not turn to the proud or to those who turn to a lie." So this one verse embraces all three of these sons, the righteous Shem, the unrighteous Ham, and the undecided Japheth, who is going to play a very pivotal role in the very end time games, if you will, that men have a tendency to want to play with the Creator of the universe. So as we pick up again in verse 9, it says, "But let the humble brother rejoice because he is exalted, and the rich one rejoice in his humiliation, because he will pass away like the flower of the grass. For the sun rose with a hot wind and dried up the grass, and its flower fell out, and the beauty of its appearance perished. So also the rich one will fade away in his ways." This verse applies to those who are loving the Father, so they would apply to the righteous. Even the rich here identifies that his wealth is not his own, and that it too will be gone, possibly even before he passes away. So these three things here applies to the righteous. Isaiah 40, verse 6 through 8 says this, "A voice said, 'Cry,' and he said, 'What shall I cry? All flesh is grass, and all of its grace as a flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades, because the Spirit of Yahweh blows on it. Surely the people is grass. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our Elohim shall rise forever." So here again, Father relates us as grass of the field that's here today and gone tomorrow. So we should make the very best of our days that we have for the kingdom, and not worry about the righteous who seem to go on unpunished. But he says in his word repeatedly, do not be concerned about this, because they will be gone tomorrow, and no one shall remember. So as we pick up in verse 12, it says, "Blessed is the man who endures temptation, because having been approved, he will receive the crown of life which Yahweh promises to the ones loving him." And just as a reminder word here, Father says he tempts no man at all. And James relates that later in his writings here in the Brit Hadashah, that Yahweh doesn't tempt any man, but we're tempted by our own lust and carried away. And it's a stage as we detour and walk away from the Creator. And we're going to look at that a little more in depth here in the next session or two, about how we stray away from the Creator of the universe. 13 says, "Let no one being tempted say, I am tempted from Yahweh, for Yahweh is not tempted by evil, and he tempts no one. But each one is tempted by his own lust. He covets and seduces by them. Then having conceived, lust brings forth sin, and sin, being fully formed, brings forth death. Do not go astray, my beloved brothers. Every act of good giving and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, with whom is no change or shifting shadow. It is he who begot us from his own will, by the word of truth, that we should be the first fruits of his creations." So here we see a very encouraging word from the Father, that he does not tempt us. We are tempted by our own lust of the eye, or lust of the flesh, or pride of life. The same thing that Yeshua was tempted with is the same thing every man or woman on planet Earth is tempted with. As we resume in this passage in verse 19, it says, "Therefore, my beloved brothers, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man does not work out the righteousness of Yahweh." I want to pause here and just ponder on that thought for just a minute. As we look around the planet today, anger, wrath, rebellion, all those things are so prevalent in our society today. At least it's being reported by the news media as being that widespread. Evidence is that it is widespread because man has gone their own way now for close to 2,000 years since Yeshua's death, burial, and resurrection. And they have come up with multiple ways of saying that they love Yahweh, and they all have differing opinions to the amount of close to 40,000 different groups. But he says, again in verse 21, he says, "Wherefore remove far from you all impurity, and the abundance of wickedness, and with meekness receive the word that is implanted in our nature, being able to save our souls." Now, in our next session, I want to talk to you some about the implanted things that he has placed in our soul, even as he had breathed life into us from the very beginning, even as he has marked us from the very beginning and called us when we came along. We'll be looking at that in our next session, which is out of Romans chapter 8. But continuing here in verse 22, he says, "But become doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. Because if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, this one is like a man studying his natural face in a mirror. For he studied himself and has gone away, and immediately he forgot how he looked." So I would identify this as Japheth as being undecided, who today would be for Shem and tomorrow may be for Ham. And I'm just use these three because this is what we're looking at, the sons of Noah and the people groups that they represent. Japheth being the oldest, but being the one who is so undecided and can go for good or for evil. Verse 25 says, "But the one looking into the perfect law of liberty and continuing in it, this one not having become a hearer of the word, which can be forgotten, but a doer of the work, this one will be blessed in his labor. And if anyone thinks that he ministers to Elohim and does not restrain his tongue, he deceives his own heart, and his service is in vain. Pure and holy service before Yahweh and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their afflictions, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. So James here in chapter 1 basically lays it on the line and says that those who are pursuing righteousness will prosper spiritually and physically, because Yahweh says his blessings will hunt the righteous down and overtake them. I wanted to couple James chapter 1 here with a very familiar Psalms to most of us, and that is Psalms 92, which is a psalm of the Sabbath day. So let's read there, beginning in verse 1. A psalm, a song for the Sabbath day. It is good to give thanks to Yahweh and to sing praises to your name, O Most High, to make your mercy known in the morning, your faithfulness every night. So here the psalmist is saying to us, the Sabbath day is not just for taking a break. The Sabbath day is resting from your work, but striving to draw near to the Creator by joining yourselves together in your community of believers and sharing, singing praise, songs of hymns of praise, honoring Him with your heart, with your voice, with your thoughts, with your brothers and your sisters, and that would be a sweet incense to our Father. We're doing this all the time, every day, every night. Verse 3 says, on 10 strings, and on the harp, and on the lyre, with sounding music. So for those who don't like to play instruments, or won't play instruments, or don't believe you should have instruments, instruments is all through the Psalms. And King David used multiple instruments to praise the Father and the Son. Verse 4 says, for you have rejoiced me with your work, O Yahweh. I will shout in the works of your hands. It's a privilege, guys, to work, and girls. It is a privilege to work for our Creator King. And when we're doing that, we are the happiest we will ever be this side of the millennial reign. So I encourage you, if you're not in a community of believers who are working and going after the things of Yahweh and sharing their faith on a continual basis with others, join in something like that, because that's the happiest you will be this side of eternity. Verse 5 says, how great are your works, O Yahweh! Your intentions are very deep. An animal like man does not know. A fool does not understand this. Here he's talking about the unrighteous and the undecided. We should never be unrighteous or undecided. We should be working out our salvation with fear and trembling, and this is what he expects us to do. So picking up in verse 7, we see, when the wicked flourish like grass, and all the evil doers blossom, it is for them to be destroyed forever. But you, O Yahweh, are exalted forever. For lo, your enemies, O Yahweh, for lo, your enemies shall perish. That's a doublet, and when you see it like that, it's a sure thing. Yahweh's enemies will perish, and the righteous will be lifted up. He says again there, all the evil doers shall be scattered. Verse 10, but you will lift up my horn as the wild ox, and I will be anointed with fresh oil. And my eye shall look on my enemies, my ears shall hear the evildoers who rise up against me. The righteous shall flourish as a palm tree. He shall grow like a cedar in Lebanon. Those planted in the house of Yahweh, in the courts of our Elohim, shall flourish. They shall bear fruit in old age. They shall be fat and fresh. to declare that Yahweh is upright, my rock, and in him is no evil. Please allow this psalm to freshen our heart, to uplift our spirits, and to bring us to another level of obedience to the Father, and join in with our brothers and sisters every Shabbat. If we're sick, maybe they'll have a podcast that you can watch, but the joining together is worth every ounce of energy it takes to get there. So until next time, shalom.